What happens when arrogance meets justice? A racist defendant's mockery of a black judge leads to a game-changing courtroom showdown that no one saw coming. The grand federal courtroom in New York City was packed to capacity. The air was thick with anticipation as the case of the decade unfolded. Journalists lined the gallery, their pens poised, ready to capture every detail. The tension was palpable as Victoria Langley, a wealthy white socialite, strutted into the room with an air of entitlement. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a stark contrast to the somber mood that settled over the court. She held her head high, her expression unreadable, except for the faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. Judge Malcolm Carter, one of the most respected black judges in the country, sat at the bench, his expression measured and unwavering. He had presided over countless high-profile cases, yet this one carried a weight unlike any other. Langley, charged with fraud and embezzlement, stood accused of siphoning millions from a charity meant to aid underprivileged communities. The irony was not lost on anyone. Victoria exhaled dramatically, rolling her eyes as she approached the defendant's table. "Let's get this over with," she scoffed, her voice dripping with impatience. Her dismissive tone sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom. To her, this was nothing more than an inconvenience, another event on her social calendar that she had to endure before returning to the comforts of her privileged world. Judge Carter's eyes remained locked on her, unshaken by her brazen display of arrogance. His reputation was built on fairness, on ensuring that the law remained blind to status, race, or wealth. He would not be swayed by theatrics or entitlement. "Ms. Langley, you will conduct yourself with the respect this courtroom demands," he stated, his voice calm yet commanding. Langley let out a small, incredulous laugh, folding her arms. "Respect?" she mused. "For what? This is all just a show anyway." The gallery collectively inhaled. Judge Carter's gaze sharpened, though his composure remained intact. "You are mistaken if you believe this is anything less than the full weight of the law at work." His voice carried through the room, resonating with a power that silenced even the murmurs in the crowd. "Your actions have consequences, and they will be judged accordingly." Victoria leaned back, her smirk widening as if she found the entire ordeal amusing. To her, this courtroom was just another stage, and she was its star. She had evaded accountability for so long that she saw no reason to believe this moment would be any different. After all, money had always shielded her from the fallout of her actions. But something was different this time. The judge's unwavering presence, the scrutiny of the press, the weight of the law pressing down on her, there was no easy escape. Her confidence, though still present, wavered ever so slightly as she met Judge Carter's unyielding gaze. The courtroom remained still, all eyes locked onto the unfolding confrontation. The once unshakable Victoria Langley found herself in uncharted territory, facing a man who could not be bought, swayed, or intimidated. And for the first time, she began to sense the magnitude of the reckoning before her. The silence stretched, filling every corner of the room with an oppressive weight. Even the reporters, normally quick to scribble down every detail, seemed momentarily frozen in place. A bead of sweat formed at Victoria's temple, though she did not dare lift a hand to wipe it away. Her confidence had been her greatest shield, but in this moment it felt like a brittle facade, cracking beneath the weight of justice itself. Judge Carter finally spoke again, his tone unchanged. "This court does not operate on the whims of privilege, Ms. Langley. It operates on truth and accountability. And today, you will learn that no one, no matter their wealth or status, stands above the law. Have you ever seen someone think they were above the law? Let's talk about it. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffling of papers and the quiet murmurs of the prosecution. Victoria Langley sat in her chair, legs crossed, a look of utter boredom etched across her face. The trial had barely begun, yet she leaned back, uninterested, barely paying attention to the proceedings. Her expression was one of mild annoyance rather than concern, as if she were enduring an inconvenient meeting rather than facing serious criminal charges. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case, their voices steady and firm. Bank statements, forged documents, falsified financial reports, all displayed for the court to see. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution methodically presented details of her scheme, how she had siphoned money from charities, manipulated financial records, and deceived investors with an air of practiced ease. The weight of the evidence should have been damning, should have made any reasonable person shift uncomfortably in their seat. But Victoria simply rolled her eyes. "This is nonsense," she scoffed, waving a dismissive hand as if brushing away an irritating fly. Her voice carried through the courtroom, sharp and dripping with disdain. Several people in the gallery exchanged uneasy glances, while others shook their heads in disbelief. It was one thing to maintain a defense, but it was another to openly mock the gravity of the charges against her. Judge Malcolm Carter sat unmoved on the bench, his face unreadable. He had presided over countless cases, seen defendants from all walks of life. But Victoria Langley's blatant arrogance was something altogether different. He watched her carefully, taking in the way she barely concealed her amusement. How she whispered to her attorney with an air of condescension. How she smirked every time the prosecution spoke. Then, as if testing the limits of the courtroom's patience, she turned her gaze directly to Judge Carter. Her eyes gleamed with something dangerous, defiance. "Honestly, do you even understand finance?" she taunted, her voice lilting with mockery. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The very air seemed to shift, thickening with the weight of her words. Even the stenographer, who had spent years documenting countless testimonies without reaction, hesitated for a fraction of a second. The gallery buzzed with murmurs, people exchanging wide-eyed glances, unable to believe what they had just heard. Judge Carter did not flinch. He did not shift in his seat, did not allow the insult to register on his face. Instead, he held her gaze with a calm, unwavering stare, his silence more powerful than any immediate rebuke could have been. The room fell into an expectant hush, waiting for his response. But he gave none. His silence was not weakness. It was a controlled, measured display of power. Victoria, emboldened by what she perceived as a lack of reaction, let out a quiet laugh. To her, this was all still a game. She had faced scrutiny before, and had always emerged unscathed. She had no reason to believe this time would be any different. The prosecution cleared their throat, regaining control of the room. "Your Honor," the lead attorney said, choosing to push forward rather than dignify her words with a response. "As we were saying, the evidence against Ms. Langley is irrefutable. Her financial records alone prove intentional deception, and the fraudulent charities she established were designed solely for personal gain." Judge Carter finally spoke, his voice steady, his words precise. "Proceed." The simplicity of the command sent a clear message. Her words held no power here. The trial would continue, and justice would not be derailed by her arrogance. Victoria leaned back once more, the smirk still on her lips. But there was a flicker of something else in her expression now, a hesitation, a shadow of doubt. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs, had fallen silent again. The weight of justice was settling in. The courtroom was thick with tension as the prosecution prepared to present its final witness. Every eye in the packed room shifted toward the stand as a composed and confident forensic accountant took his seat. He adjusted his glasses, his demeanor cool and professional. This was the moment the prosecution had been building toward. The unraveling of Victoria Langley's carefully constructed web of deceit. The lead prosecutor stepped forward, his voice steady and deliberate. "Please state your name and credentials for the court." The forensic accountant nodded. "My name is Daniel Harris. I have worked in financial investigations for over 20 years, specializing in forensic accounting and fraud detection. I have testified in numerous cases involving financial crimes." Judge Malcolm Carter observed the exchange with quiet intensity. His gaze briefly flickered toward Victoria, who, for the first time, was sitting a little more upright in her seat. Her usual smirk had not vanished entirely, but it was noticeably thinner. The prosecutor wasted no time diving in. "Mr. Harris, can you walk the court through your findings regarding Ms. Langley's financial activities?" Harris flipped open a large binder, filled with pages of meticulously documented transactions. He spoke with precision, explaining how funds meant for charitable causes had been funneled into private offshore accounts. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars meant for cancer research, education programs, and community outreach had instead been used to finance a life of excess. Ms. Langley established multiple charities under the guise of philanthropy, Harris explained. However, financial records show that nearly 80% of all donations were transferred into personal accounts overseas. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The details were damning, but Harris was far from finished. He turned the page in his binder, displaying a new set of records. Furthermore, these funds were then used for personal expenses, including luxury vacations, designer clothing, and extravagant purchases. The prosecutor took a step closer to the witness stand. "Mr. Harris, can you give the court a specific example?" Harris nodded. He adjusted his glasses and turned to face the jury. On March 14th of last year, Miss Langley hosted a fundraising gala for cancer research. That same day, financial statements show a $200,000 transaction for a custom jewelry purchase from an exclusive boutique in Paris. The funds were taken directly from the charity's account. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Victoria's smirk faltered for the first time. She shifted in her seat, adjusting the cuffs of her designer blazer. The weight of the evidence was pressing down on her, chipping away at her confidence. Judge Carter remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, watching as her arrogance slowly unraveled. The room was no longer hers to command with indifference. The truth, cold and inescapable, was closing in. The prosecutor pressed on. "So, Miss Langley claimed to be raising money for cancer research while simultaneously using those same funds for personal extravagance." Harris nodded. "That is correct." Victoria's attorney shifted uncomfortably beside her but remained silent. The damage was done, and no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the stark reality now laid bare before the court. For the first time since the trial began, Victoria looked uncertain. The weight of her lies, the years of deception, the confidence she had worn like armor, it was all beginning to crack. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the defendant's table, her posture rigid. Judge Carter finally leaned forward. His voice was calm, measured. "Miss Langley, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence?" The courtroom fell into complete silence. Every person in the gallery, every journalist, every juror waited for her answer. But for the first time, Victoria Langley had none. The fall from grace had begun. Victoria Langley leaned forward in her chair, exuding the same defiance that had carried her through the entire trial. Her lips curled into a smirk as she addressed the court, her voice thick with entitlement. "I'm too important to be locked up. Let's just move on." A wave of murmurs spread through the gallery. Reporters furiously scribbled notes, cameras clicked, and spectators exchanged stunned glances. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. Judge Malcolm Carter, who had listened patiently to every argument, every piece of evidence, and every display of arrogance, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight behind it. "Miss Langley, your arrogance is astounding." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto hers, his words measured and deliberate. "You've mocked this court, ignored the law, and insulted every hard-working citizen who follows the rules." The courtroom fell into a hushed silence. The walls seemed to close in, amplifying the intensity of the moment. Victoria's smirk wavered, her fingers tightening around the edge of the defense table. Judge Carter continued, his tone unwavering. "For too long, people like you have believed that wealth and status place them above the law, that justice is merely an inconvenience, a minor roadblock on the path to excess." He paused, allowing his words to settle. Victoria shifted in her seat, the confidence she had wielded like a weapon suddenly feeling more like a shield with cracks forming along its surface. "You believe your wealth makes you untouchable," Judge Carter said, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "But today, justice speaks louder than privilege." A ripple of anticipation coursed through the gallery. Even the journalists, usually detached and impartial, seemed caught in the moment, their pens hovering over their notepads. Victoria's smirk disappeared entirely. She sat stiffly, her body betraying a tension she had fought to suppress. Her entire life had been built on the foundation that rules applied to others, not to her. And now, that foundation was cracking beneath the weight of consequence. Judge Carter reached for his gavel. "It is the ruling of this court that you, Victoria Langley, be held fully accountable for your crimes." Gasps filled the room. The words landed like a hammer, shattering any last illusion that she could walk away from this unscathed. Her jaw clenched, her hands curled into fists on the table. "You are hereby sentenced." The courtroom held its breath. Time seemed to slow, every eye fixed on the judge, waiting for the final blow. Victoria's once arrogant demeanor had finally crumbled. The reality she had so vehemently denied was now undeniable. Justice had spoken. Judge Malcolm Carter leaned forward, the weight of his next words pressing down on the courtroom like a storm about to break. Every person in the room sat on the edge of their seat, waiting for the final verdict. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was almost deafening. Guilty on all counts. The words struck her like a thunderclap. Victoria Langley's face turned pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. Her smirk had long since vanished. She gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The once powerful socialite, who had sauntered into the courtroom with arrogance, now looked as if the floor beneath her had given way. A murmur swept through the courtroom, growing into a wave of hushed whispers. Reporters scrambled to take notes, their pens flying across pages. Spectators exchanged wide-eyed glances, some nodding in approval, others too stunned to react. Even Victoria's legal team seemed momentarily frozen before frantically flipping through their documents, whispering amongst themselves, desperately searching for a loophole, a lifeline. Judge Carter remained composed, his face unreadable. He let the moment sink in before delivering the final blow. You will serve 15 years in federal prison and pay full restitution to every victim you defrauded. The reaction was immediate. A gasp erupted from Victoria, her body jerking forward in disbelief. The gallery burst into murmurs, shockwaves rolling through the room as the reality of her sentence settled in. This was not a slap on the wrist, not a fine she could pay off, not a mere inconvenience. This was real. This was justice in its purest form. 15 years? Victoria's voice cracked, her carefully maintained composure shattering. You can't be serious. Judge Carter met her glare, his gaze unshaken. Justice is serious. Victoria shook her head, eyes darting around the room, as if searching for someone to intervene, someone to save her. Her attorneys murmured something in her ear, but she barely seemed to hear them. Her entire life, she had believed in her own invincibility, in the power of wealth and privilege to shield her from consequences. That belief had been stripped away in an instant. The courtroom remained charged with emotion. Some nodded in approval at the ruling, satisfied that for once power and privilege had not won. Others watched in stunned silence, witnessing the fall of a woman who had once believed she was untouchable. Judge Carter's voice broke through the murmurs. Bailiffs, take the defendant into custody. 2 uniformed officers approached. Victoria recoiled, shrinking away as if reality had only now sunk in. Her breathing grew rapid, and for the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. She tried to speak, but no words came. The courtroom doors swung open as the bailiffs escorted her away. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment of her downfall. The once proud socialite, who had laughed in the face of justice, now walked a path she never imagined for herself, one of consequence. As the heavy doors closed behind her, Judge Carter set down his gavel. Justice had been served, and this time it had spoken louder than privilege. Days later, the media explodes with the ruling, wealth doesn't equal immunity. Victoria's empire crumbles. Her assets are seized. Her name becomes synonymous with greed and downfall. News outlets run headlines dissecting every detail of the case. Major networks replay footage of her sentencing, highlighting the dramatic moment she was led away in handcuffs. The public reacts with a mixture of shock, satisfaction, and debate. Commentators weigh in on talk shows. Some argue that justice was finally served, while others claim that this is only the beginning of a broader reckoning for the elite who believe they are above the law. Social media erupts. Hashtags trend worldwide. #justice. Served no one is above the law. Once loyal followers of Victoria's lavish lifestyle turn against her. Former friends and business partners scrambled to distance themselves, issuing public statements to avoid backlash. Meanwhile, victims of her fraud begin to speak out. An elderly woman, who lost her retirement savings to one of Victoria's fake charities, appears on national television. Tears fill her eyes as she thanks the court for finally bringing accountability. Judge Carter's ruling is praised as a landmark case for holding the elite accountable. Legal experts cite the case in discussions about reform. Some call for stricter regulations on financial fraud, while others commend the judiciary for proving that no one is untouchable. He issues a final statement. Let this be a lesson. The law does not bow to arrogance. The words resonate across the country. Victoria Langley, once the symbol of wealth and excess, is now a cautionary tale. What's the biggest takeaway from this case? Let's talk in the comments.